So, guys, I want to do a really quick video and I want to talk about Scott D'Amore. And I do want to say that on the surface, I really don't know who Scott D'Amore is, except that he was managing TNA Wrestling, and a lot of people were saying that he did a really great job. Like, honestly, changing the name from Impact Wrestling back to TNA was a good move because a lot of people chant TNA. And then also, Impact Wrestling is always a reminder of how Hogan and Bischoff didn't understand TNA and they wanted to do their own ideas. And they almost had a mentality of, okay, we're also heels, so therefore, if you're booing and it gets a reaction, therefore that means that it's actually a good reaction, when actually it turned off a lot of people. And then also, I've seen some clips of him, and I believe he did a burning table spotlight, but there's always been a sense with him that he seems like he really cared about the company. He was willing to do spots. He was willing to do things like have Jordan Grace appear at WrestleMania. I know at the Royal Rumble, and that's exposure for Impact Wrestling, for TNA Impact Wrestling, and other things like that. And he definitely wanted to work with WWE. Maybe he could have done something where AJ Styles appears at Slammiversary and he gets into the Hall of Fame. Like, there was really a sense from, and I know him on the surface, that he really cared about TNA Wrestling. And maybe one of the reasons why he wanted to purchase the company was really just to be like, okay, well, I just know how to manage things and I know how to kind of take this company to the next level. And that way, once I have control, I'm going to get rid of the people who can't really run the ship. And that's kind of been the issue with TNA Wrestling, is that it seems like a lot of times in their company, they've had the hard workers, they have people who understand how to make it work. And usually it's run by people who only care about profits and also just care about doing what they want. It's ultimately like, the best example is when you watch Kitchen Nightmare with Gordon Ramsay, like how you may have a chef with a lot of potential and they actually work in a restaurant where the owners do what they want and the owners call their food bad because the owners want to make their own food and want to go with their own ideas. And like, I've done filmmaking, I've kind of seen those types of personality where there's people who are very serious and they want to do projects and they want to get things done, and then usually somebody interferes and then they try to take over a project, or they try to ruin things, or they try to just interject themselves because they have a sense of, they have control issues. And I think that's very evident in TNA Wrestling, so I think the first thing that I would say is that if TNA Wrestling is that type of company, then it needs to go out of business and people shouldn't support it and just let it die, really, because you can't kind of have that company that always seems like they're getting their momentum and usually it gets fucked over, because then it's like saying, why have it? At least one thing I can respect about Tony Khan is that I think that he does take some strides to really improve. Sometimes he doesn't do that, and then I think that he may be going a little bit downhill right now. But there's definitely been, him trying to make things better. And even though he doesn't have all the answers, I can respect somebody who's like, okay, well, I'm humble enough to understand that there needs to be some improvements. I don't think he does it at the level he should. And I also think that there is some really big concerns about him not being focused on the right things. And there's also some concerns about him, being in a little bit of denial. I'll admit it, but there is some like percentile, a very low percentile of him actually wanting to make AEW profitable and go forward. But with that said, I do think that Scott D'Amore should sign with AEW and Tony Khan should give him power, because I do think that what I see from Scott D'Amore is he's very passionate. Definitely his deals with WWE and other things like that are very, very good. So what would happen, again, if you have some wrestlers on the AEW roster and you're like, okay, well, we want to have a fantasy match at WrestleMania. What would happen if you have like Will Ospreay, versus Dragon Lee? Or what would happen if you have Penta El Zero versus like Dragon Lee at WrestleMania? Or what would happen if you have a wrestler that's not in the WWE Hall of Fame like Dustin Rhodes, and then you're like, okay, well, we want Dustin to be in the Hall of Fame. We also want Dustin to go and help Cody Rhodes or stuff like that, really. Or maybe you do a match where Cody wins the championships. You have a match with he and Dustin on WWE television, and even if Dustin doesn't win, it still is good exposure. It puts light on it puts some tension on AEW. What would happen if Scott D'Amore set that up? That would be good exposure for AEW. And definitely the other thing that I will say is that what would happen if he was really passionate and then he was kind of like, I have a professional wrestling mind. I know how to book this stuff very well. And then he books Dynamite and you say, okay, well, the next 6 months you're booking Dynamite and he does a great job and there's a lot of great revenue. Like, I think that Tony has the sense of saying, okay, well, since he's doing a good job, learn from CM Punk and other people that he needs to be protected. That means if the Young Bucks or other people are getting jealous with how Scott D'Amore is booking things, Tony says, you know what, I'm going to listen to Scott D'Amore and not you guys. He has it figured out, you guys don't. And then he learns from that. And I also think that would be something I think Tony Khan understands, because in the end of the day, he should not be a person that's like, okay, this is a vanity project, and if he's losing like $30 million or whatever a year, eventually his father's going to cut him off, because he's going to be like, how can you, this can't go on forever, because eventually it may take a long time, it may take a couple of decades, but you can't have a wrestling company that's losing that much money, really, because eventually it will go bankrupt, or Tony will spend all his money in it. And the argument cannot be, okay, well, you know what, it's going to put a lot of people out of a job. No, everybody has to step up. And if you know people like Scott D'Amore, who was very passionate, who will put himself in the ring, who's gotten a lot of attention on TNA wrestling, and there's a lot of talk about TNA kind of having a resurgence, and definitely doing a great job hiring people like Dolph Ziggler and other people that have some attention. Imagine if he got fired from TNA and then he joined AEW and he was fixing a lot of their problems, So I think it would be a good move. You need more brilliant minds. And then also he could do stuff like, he'd be like, okay, well, now you need to teach the next generation of writers or professional wrestlers who want to become writers, what to do, and like a philosophy almost. So I think that's almost one of the issues with professional wrestling. I think that there's a lot of people who don't really teach the art of storytelling, or just like, okay, how do you book a professional wrestling show? How do you kind of have big angles or the right moves and matches? I think that not everybody writes about that philosophy, and people just give those people jobs. But the problem is that it gets to a point where some people like that, they need to be starting writing books, or they need to kind of be like, okay, well, they're going to retire in maybe 10, 15 years, but they need to teach the next generation. And then Scott D'Amore can really do that. But I do think that he would be in good hands with AEW, and I think he's in his early 50s. So obviously, if Scott D'Amore really needs a good retirement plan or needs to make some money and he's actually doing well for AEW, it's a good fit for everybody. But I also think that this would make a lot of people really happy, because a lot of people are mad about Scott D'Amore not being with TNA and saying, well, this guy really turned things around. Imagine if during the big business show you had Mercedes Moné in the main event, and then you also had Scott D'Amore open the show, and then you maybe have Okada in the middle of the show. That would be really good for everybody, So I just think that, for a lot of good reasons, it would help Tony Khan to hire Scott D'Amore. And just to reiterate, definitely there's a lot of attention on him. There's a lot of recognition that he's doing a great job in TNA. And then also, if he's really passionate about professional wrestling and he thinks that he can change AEW and Tony Khan protects him, so he's not in a situation where he has good ideas and it gets thrown out the window, like what happened to Jim Cornette in TNA Wrestling, then it's a good fit, really. And then also, too, that it also kind of shows that Tony Khan is not about throwing money at a problem, and his solution is sign a big star, get out of jail free card. The solution is to hire people who know a lot about professional wrestling, who know how to manage, who know how to write stories, who know how to just fix problems, and then actually give them breathing room and saying, okay, now you're actually going to be in charge of these things. And I'm not going to, and I'm going to make sure, and it's my job to make sure that what you say happens. So we're not running into a WCW situation or a TNA situation or a Vince McMahon situation of somebody with good ideas and good execution. Eventually, somebody wants to get in and, put their shit in the chili, type of thing, really. So yeah, I think it's good if Scott D'Amore does sign with AEW and if Tony Khan does sign him.